I am really happy to be here today with my friend Bruce Kidd. And I'm just going to tell maybe just a little bit of a background story before I turn it over to Bruce. So, Bruce is and his organization will be one of the ones that we're working with this year in our experiential learning project, the one that's about to kick off next week. And so, just to give you a little bit of a background story, Bruce will have the details. I won't have the details, I'm afraid. But a few years ago, um, some places started legalizing gambling, and the Canadian government kind of considered that at the time and ended up suggesting or ended up deciding that, yeah, they would legalize gambling as well. And of course, there's a lot of potential revenue flow from gambling. And so that was, I think, maybe forefront on a lot of people's minds. What was not forefront on their minds is how aggressively the sports gambling companies would start marketing gambling. And, within a very short period of time, they were doing things that was unconventional in the marketing world. They were developing deals directly with like the NBA and the NHL and other major leagues. And those deals allowed them to actually integrate the marketing with the broadcasts. So it wasn't even the case that you left your game to go to an ad for something, sports gambling, let's say. The sports gambling ad is integrated right within the broadcast of sports. And that makes the marketing literally inescapable. You cannot watch sports now and not be exposed to the marketing. And that was annoying me as a sports consumer, as somebody who loves watching sports, especially anything sort of national. It was really, really annoying to see all these ads, in part because I knew there was a lot of children watching these sports, and that's a sort of tradition in our country to sit and watch these things with your children. And now, when you were doing that, you were exposing your children to sports gambling ads that were pushing them into a behavior that we know can be extremely dangerous. So here's the point I want to make about that. I, as a consumer of sports, was watching and grumbling and, really feeling like somebody should do something about this. This is not right. And I think I can't imagine how many of us Canadians were out there doing that. I've heard that Bruce was one of those Canadians as well, and that he was out there complaining and saying somebody should do something. And at some point, somebody suggested to Bruce, well, maybe you should do something. And, the critical point I'd like to highlight here is Bruce did do something. And that something is really starting to gather steam and could have real impact. It's not that it's a one person game. Bruce has a whole team behind him, and to some extent, we're going to recruit you guys or some of you as part of that team. But one day I was watching CP24, and on comes my friend Bruce. So Bruce used to be my boss. He was principal here at UTSC, vice president at U of T, and of course, a marathon runner on the Canadian Olympic team. And so there was Bruce on TV, and Bruce was leading the charge. He had started this organization, BanAdsForGambling.ca. And he said, we're going to try to get the government to put some restrictions on the marketing of sports. And so, at any rate, I'm going to sort of allow Bruce to tell the story from his perspective from there. But that just made me very proud of Bruce and what he was doing. And it reminded me that, sometimes when you see something, you just have to act, and sometimes that action can lead to good places. So with all of that said, I would like to turn over the floor a little bit first to Bruce so that he can just sort of tell his side of the story. And I've asked Bruce to kind of go back a little bit, give us a little bit of his story too. We started with the Indigenous Welcome, where we all share our stories. So I've added Bruce asked him to give us a little bit of that, and then just take it where he would like to. So I will turn the floor over to you, my friend.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry I could not join you in person this morning. I have a busy schedule in another part of the city, but you're lucky enough to be on one of the most beautiful campuses in North America. And I congratulate you for your decision to go to the University of Toronto, Scarborough. As my friend and colleague Steve said, and I'll give you more information on these slides. And Steve, can you see the slides?
Ken, yep, all looks good, Bruce.
Okay. So as one slide will tell you, gambling and sports betting were legalized by the Canadian Parliament in 2021. And the legislation gave the provinces and territories the right to operate sports betting markets in their jurisdictions. As a result of that, in Ontario, as Steve has mentioned, sports betting took off in a very big way. And to carve out their markets, the 40 or so betting companies that registered with the Ontario government began massive advertising campaigns on television, during broadcasts at every moment, on radio, of course, on social media, but on rink boards, in the hockey arenas, in back screens at baseball stadia, and even on the back of toilets in athletes' dressing rooms in sports facilities. You couldn't miss it. I think the CBC found that there was an ad every 3 seconds. As Steve has said, as Professor Jordans has said, they were integrated with the presentation of sport. The commentators mentioned the odds, talked up the bets, talked up the importance of sports betting, and they said over and over again that you can't really enjoy sports until you bet. As someone who's been involved in sports all my life, I was grossed out by that. I mean, the message that sports is primarily about betting, and the only way to enjoy sports is by betting, really offended my sense of what sport should be about. That message disembodies sports, take it from the holistic, kinesthetic, embodied performance. It took it out of the physical dimension. It took it out of the communal one where you're playing with and against other people. And it took it out of all of the narratives about community and place and the values. I found that really, really upsetting. And I will give you more of that as I go through this talk. And as a result of that, and as a result of my access to the media, I wrote an op-ed for the Globe and Mail talking about what was wrong with the tsunami of ads. And I was approached by a whole bunch of people, old friends, people I'd never met before, saying, well, what organization can we join to fight this? I looked around. Although the United Church had passed the motion against gambling 30 or 40 years ago, it wasn't doing anything at that time. And people kept on pressing me. So along with an old friend, former mayor of Toronto, John Sewell, whom I'd known since grade school, with whom I knew not as much for his political activity but his sports activity. We played hockey against each other. We were teammates in track and field at Malvern, and he and I decided to start a campaign to fight that. And so if there's something to be done, and nobody else is doing anything, and you can do something, you should do that. There's an old Jewish saying, if there are no men, be thou a man. And I'm proud to say that in this case, that is what we did. So let me take you through this talk, and which briefly outlines our campaign, what we're doing, and then open it up for your questions. And I'm very grateful for your attention. And I'm very grateful that my colleague and now collaborator, Professor Jordans, has given me this opportunity. So here's what I'm going to talk about. I'll quickly go through the background because I've shared that, outline the campaign that we've created, outline the lobbying that we're doing, and the main arguments that we make, and then bring you up to the present in terms of how far we've got. Is that okay? Good. So this all began with a decision at the U.S. Supreme Court in 2018 to allow sports betting in all states. Prior to that, sports betting was allowed in Nevada, but no other states. And so one of those states sued for the right to be able to regulate sports betting, and the Supreme Court in the US agreed, opening up the doors to legalize sports betting across that country. It grew so quickly that Canadians, particularly in municipalities like Windsor, close to the US border, said legalized sports betting in the US is taking money away from our casino industry, which is important for our economies. And they began a campaign to legalize sports betting in Canada. That campaign around Bill C-218 was successful in 2021. What is appalling, is sad, is unfortunate, is that when Parliament debated that bill, all of the talk was about the revenue that they could capture in Canada from sports betting for private companies and for governments. There was no attempt to look at the international experience with sports betting and other forms of gambling. To the extent there was concern about negative consequences, there was some talk about game fixing and the possibility that gamblers would get to athletes to fix games, but nothing about the potential harm that sports betting and addiction to sports betting would create. We were so naive in political terms about what this would do. Ontario was the first to step in, and in 2022, our province registered more than 40 private companies to conduct sports betting. Most of them were the big internationals like FanDuel, but there were some other new ones established. And as the last two bullets indicate, that legalization prompted an enormous take-up by bettors, and it was driven by what I call a tsunami of advertising, which you can't miss. And the CBC estimated last year that 20% of TV sports programming is advertising. 20%. You can't miss it. As I told you, John and I were pressed by new and old friends to do something about it, and we created this organization, BanAdsForGambling, that you can see on. You can click if you haven't already. We were enraged by the ads, the way that games were broken up by this, the way broadcasters increasingly only talked about betting, not about the athletic skill, not about the consequences of the games to the season of the teams, only about the bets and what are called the prop bets, the bets inside the game. Who will score the first goal? Which team will get the first penalty? Will the referee throw a red card in the first half? All of these mini bets or micro bets within the games. It was estimated that with the technology of, I'm not sure where my phone is, the technology of the phones, you can now bet continually. And Professor Jordans has done some really important analysis of the consequences of that. If there are 300 pitches in a game of baseball, you can bet 300 times. It's not about the outcome, whether the Jays win or the Orioles win anymore. It's about these mini bets. It completely removes betting from the actual games and their skills and their culture. I'll go on. We came together. We're a pan-Canadian group. So our meetings, like this class, are on Zoom. We have active members and supporters from all across Canada, from Vancouver Island in the west to Halifax and Nova Scotia in the east. And gradually we put together these 5 goals. 1, ban the ads. Our model, and we came up with that strategy because the international experience is that the most effective way to reduce the harm is to ban the ads, which will lead to lower levels and lower intensities of gambling. And the precedent for that was the effort a previous generation took to ban ads for tobacco as a strategy to limit lung cancer. I can go into that in the question period if you like. But now there are no ads for tobacco as a public health strategy, and that's what we focused on. Secondly, stop the spread, limit the sports on which people can bet, and ban them from the Olympic, Paralympic, amateur, and educational sports like youth sports here at U of T. We don't want the pressures on athletes that come, well-documented pressures on athletes that come from sports betting to be placed on Olympic and varsity athletes. Thirdly, establish a duty of care. So make the gambling companies liable for the full social, economic, and treatment costs of gambling harms, which I will document in a few minutes. If they're going to profit from it, they should pay the cost of the harm that they create. Fourthly, raise taxes. So if one of the attractions is to generate revenue, well, some of that revenue should come to governments, and that revenue should be used to pay for treatment and education, which was the case in tobacco. Canada, I'm sorry for the typo here, but Ontario only charges 20% on gambling revenue, whereas many states in below the border levy 40%, and New York State, which on a clear day like today you can see from Scarborough Bluffs, charges 51%. And in New York, all that money goes into education and new sports facilities for municipalities and schools. So Ontario does none of that. So our fourth proposal is to raise taxes. And fifthly, end the conflicts of interest. Stop broadcasters from promoting bets. I mean, they present themselves as journalists, as impartial commentators, and here now they become part of the sales job for this industry. Very briefly, as much as we can, we have been lobbying governments for legislation and regulation. We've got, as you can see from our webpage, a number of endorsements. Uh, we uh, we've slowly begun to collect, analyze, synthesize, and distribute the research from around the world. And your counterparts last year in Steve's class contributed to this. I mean, what's amazing is that there is good research in most other jurisdictions in the world, in countries which went down this road earlier, and we should learn from their experience. And so one of our jobs on the campaign to ban ads for gambling has been to collect as much research as possible and to publicize it. And if you go to our website, you can see a list of bulletins. And we issue bulletins once a month. And in virtually every bulletin, we're updating the research. It's quite stunning. It's quite sobering how much people have already studied this problem. And finally, although this is a dog's breakfast, cultivate the uncompromised media. I mean, I've been involved in Toronto sport all my life. I have enjoyed good access to the sports media all my life. When I was a little kid, I was a very successful athlete and you know, a media darling. So I had lots of access. They just stiffed me right now. They're not interested in hearing about the harms that gambling creates. What are the arguments we make? Let me be very quick on this because I want to leave time for questions. You know, I was motivated to get involved in this campaign because I was grossed out by my experience watching sports on television, and I was grossed out by the idea that sport is about being passive, using your phone to make a bet, and that's what sport is. But what I've learned in the course of this campaign is that it's extremely, extremely harmful. In Canada now, with a report from a nonprofit by the name of Mental Health Research Canada, 7% of all Canadians and 15% of youth. And look around your class and think what 15% represents. 5.7 million persons overall present high risk of problem gambling. And problem gambling is an addiction. The American Psychiatric Association considered problem gambling as the only form of non-substance addiction, and it's very, very harmful. And CAMH, the Center for Alcohol and Mental Health, Center for Addiction and Mental Health, estimates that for every person addicted, 5 to 8 people are negatively affected. So it affects lots of people. As we've talked about, although all of the regulations say ads cannot be directed towards youth under the legal age of betting, 18, those ads are out there all the time. As a result of the research and the experience in other countries, a growing number of other countries have banned or restricted the ads for gambling as a public health measure. And I invite you to read some of that research, and you can see it on our bulletin, or we can share that with you. I said this in my introduction. What were they thinking? Why were they so blind? I mean, Canada has international connections in almost every field there is. And these persons in Ottawa were completely unprepared to look around the world before making this fateful decision. As someone involved in sport, I also see betting as a safe sport issue. It undermines the value and the purpose of sport, and increasingly has been reported at the professional and college level in the United States. Bettors who lose a prop bet on a particular player will abuse that player on the social media. And if you follow the Raptors, you know that players like Chris Boucher have and others like Scotty Barnes have repeatedly complained about this. The example that is most upsetting is that there was a quote, the bettors set quotas, targets for each player before the game, and you can place a bet on whether, in this case, Chris Boucher will make 10 points. In the later stages of the game, with only 7 points, Boucher was standing in the 3-point area where he likes to stand. And he got the ball, and he was up this to make the 3-point, which would have enabled him to make his quota of 10 points. But he didn't take the shot. He fired a pass to Scotty Barnes under the net, who went up and made a 2-point layup, which enabled the Raptors to take the lead. The Raptors won the game. Boucher was abused for not taking the 3. But what did he do? He made a pass to a teammate that enabled them to win the game. But he was abused for that in racist terms because the bettors didn't win their prop bets. That's what's happening as a result of sports betting. And I can tell you from my contacts in community and intercollegiate sport, young athletes, particularly male athletes, are under enormous pressure to do that. And I'm sure there are some athletes in this audience who can vouch for this. The pressure on everybody involved to fix matches. What is incredible is that the betting industry says to players, don't do this. You'll be thrown out of sport for life if you do. Well, at the same time, they're putting, the whole industry is out there promoting betting. It's such hypocrisy. Our campaign is not out to prohibit sports betting, but we think that it should be strictly regulated, fully taxed. The tax revenues used to address crises in mental health and limited. So where are we? Last year we got two senators in the Canadian Senate whom we know, Marty Deacon and Brent Cotter, one from Ontario. Marty's from Waterloo. Brent is from Saskatchewan. They drafted a bill with the assistance of the Ministry of Justice to regulate sports betting. You can go to the Senate website, and there's a ton of information on that. They introduced that bill, and over the course of the last 6 months, maybe 8 months, it moved through the Senate, and earlier this week it was unanimously approved. Now it goes to the House of Commons, where we have promises of support from MPs in all 5 parties. There's a lot of public opinion on our side. So that's a good news story. It's slow. A British lord who spoke at the public hearing said, we are on the lower slopes of a very steep climb, but we're moving up that hill. Ontario is another story. Ontario is the Wild West of sports betting. They have minimal regulations and they do very little to enforce them. They allow what's called responsible betting, which is just such a joke. I call it Orwelling, because they have these in-your-face ads, and at the bottom they have a little line saying, bet responsibly. What a contradiction in terms that is. And we get nowhere with the Ontario government. They don't answer our emails. They don't answer our request for a meeting. The regulator occasionally follows up on our complaint, but we have to remind them a number of times. We've won one complaint where betting ads were placed just about on every visible space in arena that catered only to children and youth, including on the back of washroom stalls, on the dressing room doors, on the rink boards. And the regulator did force the advertiser to take those down, but we haven't had very much. The Ontario government is not very supportive. So this is what we're up against. And thank you very, very much for your attention. I look forward to your questions and comments.
Yeah, very cool. Let me just add one other little dimension too that I like to sometimes add. When I think of society and we think of the sort of best of society, we think of the arts and we think of sport. And often as parents, those are things we love to see our children to become involved in. And when we think of sports itself, they learn how to work with others towards common goals. They have to learn specific roles to play. They have to learn to play within rules. All this great, and of course they're learning to connect with other human beings, all this fantastic stuff that comes from having your child in sport. But now, from what Bruce said, yeah, that child is going to also be bombarded by ads and put under pressure from all this sports betting culture, and it's like a disease that's come into a really, really great thing. So yeah, at any rate, let's open it up. So please, if you have questions, you can throw them in the chat or feel free to open your mic. If there's a lot of questions, we'll do the hand thing. Let's do the hand thing. So yeah, there we go. So Maya has a question. Please, Maya.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Mr. Bruce. I was just wondering, in preparation for our project, you mentioned how there was a public health initiative for banning ads for tobacco, if I'm not wrong. And so I was just wondering what was the context in which that initiative began, how it was implemented, who kind of started getting the ball rolling with that, and how can we kind of learn from that to work towards banning ads for sports betting.
Well, thanks, Maya. If you look online, if you Google, you'll see quite an extensive literature on the campaign to ban ads for tobacco. It didn't happen overnight. It came about as a result of a great deal of public pressure in both Canada and the United States. It was initiated by a wide range of health activists, of media activists, ordinary citizens, survivors of lung cancer. And I really appreciate your question. It reminds me that we should find one good article on the history of that campaign to post on our website. In Canada, it was led by an activist by the name of Gar Mahood, Mahood, and he was primarily interested in banning indoor smoking because of the harmful effect of secondhand smoke. But he discovered, as we did, that part of the campaign had to be a ban on ads. And it was a multi-step campaign. Initially, there was, I can't remember exactly what came first, but a step to minimize ads, and the tobacco companies found a way around that. So it was a multi-step process. Professor Tim Dewhurst at the University of Guelph, who's a member of our campaign, did his PhD thesis on this. So I'm going to ask him for some sources, and I'll send them to Steve, and maybe we'll get something to you. But tobacco is the example that we follow.
Yeah, and by the way, so let's just be clear. This will be your task for you guys. Bruce,
Yeah,
Bruce
right.
is Bruce is sort of your new boss, or at least will be for some of you if you get assigned to this case. And basically, what we're going to do is have you work as a small marketing group. So there'll be 5 of you in a group, and to identify some target market, some group you want to bring this message to, and then to create some form of public service announcement that will hopefully be, effective in getting them to think about this issue and develop a stance, and hopefully, to consider the ban side of things. So going back to those cigarette PSAs, looking at some of those old PSAs that were used, it would be a good place to start to think about a good strategy you might use on your project as well. Anybody else have a question for Bruce? So I'm going to say one thing. So Bruce mentioned, the media has been hard to talk to a little bit, and that's because the media is in bed with the sports betting companies. This is the weird situation we're in now, where some of the same people that give us the news are also in business relationships with sports betting, and so they don't really want to have continual stories against sports betting. And what that means is, if we're going to take this on, it's going to maybe need to be a little more grassroots. And you guys are as grassroots as it comes. Your voices are powerful, are strong. You, to many cases, are the ones being targeted, not just you, but your little brothers, your little sisters that are watching sports. Think of them. This is a chance where we're at this place where the Canadian government is really considering how much it should limit the ads on sports betting. And if we get our PSAs out there, and that might be both through the formal process where Bruce ultimately says, yeah, we love these PSAs and we'd love to use them, but also you guys can just share what you create through social media and sort of become part of, just well, Bruce gave me a magazine once. Do I still have it sitting around here? It was about sports gambling, and it had this title that said, "Where is the outrage?" Because it was highlighting all of the dangers. Or where's the outcry? I'm sorry. And last year we said we would post things with hashtag we the outcry to kind of say, no, we're going to be the outcry. And so I would encourage some of you guys, if you want to share, use hashtag we the outcry, and let's kind of put our voices together a little bit. Anybody else have a question for Bruce? He does have to leave a little early. We have to respect his time. But hey, you have a chance to talk to an Olympian and an ex-leader at the University of Toronto, and a leader of this initiative. Anybody have a question or thought? Here we go. Would pushing for a label that indicates harmful effects, indicates the harmful effects of this sort of gamble, like the ones on cigarette packs, possibly aid the cause, such as youth who may fall deep into this trap and lose their sense of proper ways? So what do you think of just adding some labels to the ads, I guess?
Thanks, Amir. I think that's a great thing to do, and I hope that that in your group assignment you consider preparing such an ad. One of the things I didn't mention was that in the anti-tobacco campaign, at one point, the government required the media companies, when they were still advertising, to give equal time to negative ads. And they provided a small amount of money for advocates to work with smart people like you to develop anti-tobacco ads and then show them as public service announcements. They were pretty frightening, actually. I don't know whether Steve, whether you are old enough to remember those, but I certainly do.
Yeah.
But it was a great idea, and I agree with you entirely that if people like yourself design age and culturally appropriate messages that talk about the addictive harms from sports betting, that would be a very helpful thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, there really is. If you look at a sports betting ad, you see no sense of danger. You see happy, attractive people having a great time. You know, think of the message that's being implied by that. Think of that indirect route of persuasion that I told you about. They're using it heavily. And yeah, to see some counter advertising itself would be fantastic. Let me also mention there's a whole continuum you can imagine. Bruce and I are on the hard end of the continuum, which is banning ads altogether. I think that's the right way to go. There are other organizations that are more on the reduce or find ways to restrict. And so, I'm suggesting you probably take the ban side to what you're sort of pushing, but you don't have to. Whatever your group feels like is the message that it wants to send around this. Just really good to have you thinking about this deeply. Anybody else have a question for Bruce? While I'm waiting for that question, I'll attach one little. Okay, here we go. If the government of Ontario isn't listening, what are our next steps in order for them to take this issue seriously?
That is a great question. There are many people who are asking that question about other issues on which the Ontario government is either weighing in or not doing anything on this case. As I'm sure you know, this is a very conservative government, and they like cars and they want to build a ton of highways. They hate bicycle paths. They want to tear up all the bicycle paths in Toronto. They're not big fans of the environment, and I mean, most recently the municipalities in Ontario are working on a strategy to prevent their overreach. If we had lots of money, I think if we take out, I think counter ads showing the harm and dramatizing the terrible stories we hear of what happened to young men and their families as a result of sports betting addictions, dramatizing them. I mean, CAMH have had a number of public meetings where, with the permission of families, they've come forward and given testimonials of terrible stories. It's fairly new, we don't have detailed, but if you get the stats from other countries, they're frightening. In the UK, where sports betting, even with restrictions now, still is allowed to an extent. There are more than 400 suicides by young men every year. More than one young man takes his life as a result of the problems emanating from sports betting addiction. I'm not making that up. A British lord who was head of the BBC shared that statistic with the Senate committee examining Bill S-269 a couple of months ago. I mean, it's frightening what happens. People are losing their homes, they're losing their families. There are huge, huge, huge challenges involved. People like to think it's only poor people who bet. There are a lot of very wealthy people who have lost as a result of this. I heard the other day this terrible story of a young man who, at the age of 30, came into $1 million inheritance. And 6 months later, it was all gone through gambling problems. And he's back home living in his parents' basement, unemployed, his relationship over. And this is a true story that someone volunteered to me. And there are others. I'm told that one of the major banks now trains loan managers on how to deal with clients who come in with financial problems created by addiction. I think if we could dramatize these stories in the form of anti-sports betting ads, like the old anti-tobacco ads, that might get to the attention. But I don't know. I mean, I do know that there are prominent conservative MPPs who also are opposed to gambling, who've been told to just shut up by this premier. So, uh, Cedra, if you've got any great ideas, you let me know.
I actually got a direct follow-up from another student to that and said, if the government is not listening, then we can run an online campaign through social interaction. I assume she means social media. Yeah, that's what I mean by more grassroots. We're going to have people in the House of Commons that have to make this decision. If you guys were upset, if you made your voices known, if stories were told, those are the kinds of things that can have a really strong power. And Bruce said 15% problem gambling. For everybody that has a problem gambling, they have a family around them. That when you have problem gambling, recidivism rate is really high, about 90%. It's a real hard hole to get out of once you're in it, and you bring others with it. If it's your brother, it's your sister, that impacts your whole family. This gambling becomes a disease that's impacting way more than 15% of families. So telling some of those stories, even so those families can see that, oh, somebody else understands and knows, and get that resonance going. I think that's really important. So Melissa says, what are some of the other countries that have experienced the issue that we can learn from and read more into about how they accomplished change? Now, again, I know, Bruce, it's 9:48. If you have a hard deadline.
Well, let me answer this question. It's an important question. Thanks, Melissa. And then I'll move on. I have to jump on my bike and get downtown for a meeting at 10:30. So we look to the Commonwealth countries because of the shared use of English, and we look to Europe. The countries that have completely banned ads for gambling are Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, and I believe Belgium. Many other European countries have restricted ads for gambling. For example, they have whistle-to-whistle bans, which means that when a game starts, ads stop and cannot resume until the end of the game, or that they have time zone change. So no ads are shown during the hours when children and youth are considered to watch television. They have bans on players' uniforms. We look to Australia, which is a country similar to ours, which has struggled with this for a long time and which has produced a good deal of research. Currently, Australia is considering, and there's draft legislation, a complete ban, but it's being hotly debated. So we look at those examples. Perhaps the most comprehensive research is available from the UK, from Britain. And the most recent report, and Steve, I know you've seen it, came out of the British Medical Journal called Lancet, which is one of the top academic medical journals in the world. And they commissioned a report surveying all the research findings and recommendations. And Steve, if you could post that for your students, it effectively answers a lot of what's in Melissa's question.
Yep, will do. Fantastic. Okay, with that, I do want to respect Bruce's time, and I respect your leadership, all you're doing on this campaign, Bruce. You've really been, it's just been so great to have you at the quarterbacking everything we've been doing here. And I love the shirt and your Scarborough is showing. That's fantastic. The Scarborough pride, it's starting to rise. I love it. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your leadership. Bruce, of course, will be part of the judging panel of the finalists of the PSAs. So he may actually see some of the work that you guys do and have comments on it. So thanks for being part of this project, Bruce. We will try our best to do what we can to aid your efforts.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Steve.